Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy. We're having some slight technical issues getting Nikki onto the session at the moment. So what I'll do is I'm just going to put the banner back up, and while we fight in the background to get Nikki connected, he seems to be joining but not be able to get his video or audio set up. So let me give it a couple of seconds to get that fixed, and then we'll be right with you in a second. Thanks a lot. Right, we seem to have resolved our technical issues, so we now have Nikki with us. How are you doing, Nikki?
Good afternoon, Lee. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. We had a little slight challenge there technically getting things going, didn't we?
Yeah. That was it was on my end. I'll give all credit to
Oh.
Lee here.
Yeah, it's not the non-technical people we never have an issue with. They just click on the link and they're in. It's when we invite technical people, they always seem to be challenged with it.
Yeah,
But
I'm
anyway,
trying to figure out the back end.
that's it. That might be what it is. You're making it more complicated than it needs to
I
be.
guess so.
Yeah, but thanks for joining us today. And what we normally do in these sessions is, first of all, get a little bit of a feel for you. So if you can give us a bit about your background, where you're from, where you grew up, that kind of thing, and then lead into how you got into technology. Was it something you did at school or college, or is that something later? And the type of jobs you've done. That'd be really interesting.
Sure thing. So, hello everybody. My name is Nicky Willebrand. I am from the Netherlands, as you can probably tell. I used to live near a place in Rotterdam, and now I live in Amersfoort. I kind of stumbled into technology. I used to actually study business. And when I did that, I noticed that I actually got an internship with an IT company, which was very fun for me. And I got more interested into the actual details of what was happening. And especially since I was in a sales role, I couldn't really convince my counterpartner in the conversation, like an IT manager, of the solutions that my company were giving because I didn't understand them well enough. And that kind of drove me mad. So I started to dig into how everything worked. And at that point, there was also an opportunity to really dive into cloud technologies. And that basically started my whole IT career. At that point, I was also doing a bachelor's degree at which I had my minor in data science. And I remember very vividly when I went home for the first time to show something from school. It was a small application. I've never shown my mother anything from school except that one thing. And that's when it clicked with me with like, I think I need to go into the technical part of business. So after that, I was basically smitten. That was a couple of years ago. Right now, I'm a cloud architect. I've worked at very large financial organizations in assignment of Microsoft. I subcontracted for them. I've also done very small organizations, from cloud native to very legacy system to systems that are more on the legacy spectrum, with the main focus on cloud and compliance. I think those are cloud compliance and observability really have been the focus of my career so far.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you're going to do at our event, which we're moving at the moment. We're originally going to do it on the 9th of June, but we're going to move it back to the 29th of June to give us a bit more time to promote it. But we're really going to talk about cloud native applications and also talk about compliance. And I think compliance is a really important area because a lot of people see compliance as a manual process of audit and fix, whereas in reality, we should be actually constantly compliant and even enforce compliance to ensure that we've got really good levels of security and also compliance to some of the regulatory things that we need to do as well. So what are your thoughts then around that compliance and cloud native piece and how important they are?
The thing is, I think when we define compliance, people always think about being ISO compliant. The compliance in the word itself is just adhering to a standard. It doesn't have to be a regulatory standard or a banking standard or whatever. It can be any standard. So if I, for instance, declare a certain machine needs to look a certain way and it doesn't, it's in compliance to my declaration. So compliance in the basis is just an A/B check. I say this, it needs to look like this, and if it doesn't look like it, you're in compliance. It's as simple as that. When you look at the challenges that the cloud brings, it has tremendous value. Like all the customers I've worked for, there are some cases where it didn't work out as well. But if you look at the amount of applications you get and the amount of offload you can do on the cloud provider, it's really good. The one thing people tend to overlook, I would say, is that they're still responsible for the configurations. You see sometimes in the news, you see those cloud hacks, and it's kind of being sensationalized. What it comes down to is a misconfigured resource. So where compliance and cloud really meet up, and especially in the cloud native world, is making sure you have proper configuration. And especially if you're able to challenge this configuration always. So not just setting it once and then forgetting it and hoping for the best, not actually having a constant compliance cycle with your resources. Because then what you can actually do is you can also, and I think this is one of the major strong points using compliancy-like services in the cloud, you can show the state of your cloud. Now that is something that is really challenging, especially in a very big environment with a lot of test environments, etc. Being able to have a single pane of glass over your resources and explaining what they look like at any moment in time, that's very powerful.
I agree. I agree fully. And I think as people are moving forward towards this use of cloud native applications, what they'll end up with is some form of hybrid environment. That could be some on-premise equipment, some co-located equipment. It could do, a piece in one of the cloud providers, but it could also be multiple cloud providers, depending on the services that the organization needs. So I think when we get to that point, the complexity of managing multiple environments requires some consistency in the approach. And I think, using some form of compliance and enforcing compliance ensures that we've got the same level of security wherever the application resides.
Exactly. And one key thing, I think you give a very good takeaway there, is the consistency doesn't come from the compliance, it comes from the governance. So it all starts with governance, and compliance is a way to measure your current state of your environment, to adhering to the governance. Having good, proper governance in place before moving into the cloud with no longer physical walls around you, but credit card-based walls around you is very important. Because if you have proper governance in place, you are able to challenge the environment on the governance practices and have a baseline of where to start from. A lot of times you see a lot of reworking, right? We move to the cloud, we get there, and that's all good. A lot of times it's not necessarily driven by the right, motivations. Sometimes it's just a cloud first and that's it. And you know how I feel about that. I think it's very application dependent to move to a specific cloud. However, if you set up your governance later, you're going to have to reverse engineer your current environment, and any change will introduce risk of failure, of stuff going down, especially in production. So one thing that is very critical is setting up a governance framework before you start moving. You can always do it after, but it will introduce lag, it will introduce work, and it will introduce risk, which is kind of the thing you're trying to not have at that point.
Yeah, I think, when you say that about this cloud first approach that a lot of organizations are talking about, it's got to be appropriate, hasn't it? You've got to have
exactly.
And it's not just the appropriate need of cloud, but the appropriate need of the right cloud provider, because they're all slightly different in what they deliver and how they deliver it. So it's ensuring that what you're trying to achieve is in the right place and using the right platform, I think.
You're absolutely right. I think a lot of times we just chuck it over the fence because we're well known with a specific cloud provider, or we just go through the cloud because we're told to go to the cloud. But I think application rationalization should be the first step. Does it make sense to run this application in the cloud? I think having cloud first as a method, as a statement, and then moving your data center to the cloud is not a right approach. What's a right approach is making sure that you rationalize what you have at the moment, see how that would fit in the future state. You don't want to the cloud, a coworker told me once, it's a very good one. The cloud is like a promised land, right? Everything's better there. It's cheaper, it's more efficient, etc. You'll come to know that that is basically a pipe dream when you don't do it application based. If you instead of moving applications and testing if they are actually ready to be cloud native, or you can modernize them, or their billing model can change, or you can benefit from maybe even turning it off once in a while instead of having to buy the hardware. Those are benefits that are tangible and you will feel in the short run. If you just move over your data center from left to right, so to any cloud provider, a lot of times you're not going to have a very great time. It's really critical to go application based. See if you can modernize anything before you go, because I've heard so many times we can modernize after the fact. You don't see it happen a lot anymore. There's so much other work to do. There's customer value to deliver, and customer value doesn't always depend on modernizing your application.
I think some of the other things that people forget about as well, if they're moving forward, they make the decision that they're going to go to using cloud as their platform, but they also then think, right, the right approach will be to containerize everything. And not everything fits well into containers. We've seen a lot more people utilizing persistent type application sets and things in there with, rather than the previous ethereal ones. So we're getting PVs and PVCs set up so we can actually drive an application through data, and we can also move data around through PVs as well. But I think also what we find is where we used to have maybe a physical machine many years ago, which when we virtualized it became 10 machines. These 10 machines now become into 100, maybe 150 containers, as we go into microservices, and that complexity makes things really difficult for people to, one, understand what's happening, but secondly, to be able to manage it all as well.
Yeah, especially if you share that environment across multiple clouds, for instance. I think one of the multi-cloud has proven to be something that is talked about a lot, but not often practiced, because, and I think the main reason is it isn't always economically sound to do anyway, because where data lives is kind of where you want to host your application, because otherwise you're going to pay huge egress fees in many cases. So that's one thing that kind of counters it. But also, do you really want to skill up on all these environments? I see it so often happen.
That's a challenge, I think, the skills and experience side.
Yeah, exactly. Because understanding one cloud platform really well is very difficult. Understanding three in a team is even more difficult, right? And sure, they all share the same basis and they all share about the same benefits. But on a low level, you're going to run into difficulties left, right, and center because you don't know all the low-level configuration, and you shouldn't.
Yeah, and I think somewhere where the problems start to get an issue is management of things like secrets in a Kubernetes environment. Understanding which secrets are being used and how you're managing those, how you're protecting them as well. So a lot of people are starting to use things like HSM and Vault in their Kubernetes environments to manage that, to make sure it's more secure. But I think also as it gets bigger and bigger, people are challenged with just watching it all. So monitoring was always a big thing in the physical and the virtual world, but now we seem to be seeing terminology like observability being used in cloud native environments because they're getting so big and so complicated. It's difficult to monitor it the way you would have previously.
Yeah, and the same actually happens when you look at the security space. The thing is, yes, you have to take care of less of the physical infrastructure. You're still responsible for all the layers on top of it. If you look at the shared responsibility model, for instance, it will tell you this exactly. Having a good understanding of all of the applications and how they interact. So the observability part is one of them. Understanding the security posture of all of your microservices, that can be even more challenging, especially if they're not tied to a single platform. Again, the key challenge here is the more you disperse your environment across multiple environments, and you might actually have a good business case for it to do so, and maybe you then should. But be very careful of not throwing everything everywhere and then doing everything half, because half is not good enough nowadays with the threat landscape out there. It's not good enough.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think the other thing that's becoming a challenge for a lot of people is understanding the risk as well. And the risk changes as well. So if you're developing in a test and dev environment on premise and using a specific image, it's different when you move that into production, say on premise, or will you move into production in a cloud provider. The risk levels changed, depends on the situation where you're hosting it as well. So I think people are challenged with understanding and managing risk as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of times when you go into any cloud provider, it's very easy to start off with a credit card and your $200 of free credit, and that a lot of times spirals out to production. It oh, this is very nice. We're very successful with this. Let's keep it up. And then what will happen is you create a sort of a paradigm of which you test and dev and you keep it very open because it's difficult for yourself to work from a local environment. But the local environment in the cloud is entirely different than the local environment in your data center, because your data center has physical security, network level protection. But the moment you open up a credit card and you need to get somewhere, what will you do? Like any proper development environment will have a VPN or any other private level, network level connectivity. But when you just start, you won't. And actually, a lot of times you'll see that people are already using company level data in these test environments that are not properly secured, or nobody can tell how well secure they are. I think that's a very different distinction. They can be very secure, but how can we tell? How can we measure this? How does it fit into the frameworks? That's the key.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, we don't want to tell people too much more, because we're going to cover, we could go through and cover everything we're going to talk about at the event on the 29th. So thanks ever so much for joining me today. It's really interesting to get to know you a little bit more, how you got into this space, and also, covering off a few ideas around the challenges that a lot of organizations are going to face. And I think those challenges are going to continue as people go through this journey, of utilizing cloud services more effectively, and like you say, you've got to be careful about what you use each of the services for. It's pointless throwing everything over into that cloud data center, because you're not going to get the real advantage of it, and you could end up increasing your cost and reducing your level of security as well in the process.
Yeah, 100% agree, Lee.
So thanks ever so much. The weather looks quite good over there in Holland at the moment, in the Netherlands. I'm just looking through your window. It looks quite pleasant. But thanks ever so much for joining us. We're going to start promoting the sessions on the 29th, and get your keynote up and ready to talk about cloud native applications and really around risk and compliance, which is a key area we think we need to cover.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks for watching.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.